Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
Welcome back to Berean Spirits on a beautiful Thursday morning in Southwest Missouri. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ in Springfield. And of course, we've got Richard Dodson, who's always putting up the links, putting them out on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube.
They're out.
Everywhere.
They're already out.
And he is on the ball today.
On the ball. Chris Kramer just joined us. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, all right, man. Man, I tell you what, I listened to Chris Kramer. They've got the Bible Talks YouTube channel. I listened to they do a radio program down in Russellville, Kentucky, where he's at. They're doing a series on Calvinism, and it's really good. And Chris, if you want to put up a link to the YouTube channel so folks can listen, but yeah, appreciate the work you guys are doing there. That was great. Richard with the Kearney Church of Christ, though. Kearney.
You know what? I have never, ever on this show ever advertised our radio show. Maybe I should.
No, it's not as.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Everybody tune into Chris's show.
Yeah, right.
Don't listen to mine. It's bad.
The only redeeming quality is truth is taught, you know.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's a compliment right there from Josh Thornhill over in Wichita, Kansas with the Westside Church of Christ. How you doing, Josh?
I'm good. We're preparing for apparently Snowmageddon here.
Yeah, right.
Up.
You mocked God. You mocked him. It's all your fault.
I was not mocking the Lord. Thank you.
You were calling it fall, winter. That's what you've been calling it.
That's not mocking the Lord. That's just observing the weather patterns.
That was mocking God. God heard that, and God said, all right, Josh, you want winter? I'm going to give you winter. And I told Ryan last night, I said, if you guys get swamped, blame Josh Thornhill.
Well, it'll make my wife very happy. We're currently listed at 14 to 19 inches over the next 3 days.
Yeah, so. It's wild. It's the snow totals just keep going up, no doubt about it. Hopefully, the dry air will be pushed out pretty quick, and we can get higher totals as well. I love the snow.
It is going to be bad. I mean, they're calling for 4 to 6 inches here. That's really bad.
Chris is just not fond of the ice as he's walking out of the church building.
Yeah, that's right. Oh man! Hey, real quick before I forget, and Richard, I get a call from him later. Richard, what's the radio program that you do?
Oh, KPGZ. You can go to KPGZ every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Central Time. They stream it. Just go to their website. They stream it. You can hear a sermon every morning.
You don't post it anywhere?
I mean, every Sunday morning. I never posted it on this.
I didn't know if you posted it anywhere online.
But there's some, but I probably ought to do. I probably need to put it on here. I never had. I never even thought about it, because the radio station does a lot. So I guess I just never even thought about putting it out there, but I guess I need to. I did think about making a sign, putting it in the churchyard, for people in the neighborhood to think about tuning in. But
absolutely. Anywhere we can spread the gospel, man. I mean, that, get it out. If they, if they want to go and listen to it, on the radio.
Yeah, I just hadn't thought about the radio show. I thought about everything else but the radio show, I guess, but I need to.
Chris Kramer had a guest, Nick. I think it was Nick Greenman, down in Springfield, Tennessee, with him this past week, and but they did a really good job, but it's on YouTube, so able to listen to that, which is great. Anywhere we can get the truth being taught and put out there is awesome. But we're all posting sermons and different things. Well, I say all. Richard's not, I don't guess, but not anymore. Are you doing the gospel preaching live?
Well, not as consistent as I need to. I need to do it a little more consistently.
Yeah.
I got the sign lit. That's something, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sign's lit behind me.
Yeah.
I need to be a little more consistent with putting out lessons. I do.
And Josh, there's there's a lady there in Wichita that posts your sermons or at least shares them. I don't know. That's about the only time I see them is when that lady shares them.
Yeah, it's one of our elders' wives. She'll share our Sunday morning lesson from the website, the link to the website on Facebook each week. So,
yeah. So it's on the website. Your sermon, you can go and listen on the website.
Yes, cocwestside.com.
Okay, there you go. Awesome. Here we are talking about all these congregations.
Whoa, Chris, tell them where your sermons are posted. You put your sermons online.
Oh, yeah, but nobody wants to listen to me.
No, I know it.
Yeah, Gospel Preaching with Chris Peltz on YouTube. That's where Gospel Preaching with Chris Peltz. Yep, you can listen to those on YouTube. And this show is put on there too. The live stream, Berean Spirits, is put on there as well as the other places. But yeah, yep. But anyway, yeah. So now that we're through with that, we're talking about all the works of these different congregations. It's a good thing we're spread out, because if we weren't, people might be hopping from one congregation to another here in in one area or another. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is the church hopping that takes place. And there's a couple of ways that I think we'll approach that. And that is from those who just get up and leave, right? Who like just tell a congregation, you know what, I'm never coming back, and they're gone. And sometimes they don't even say anything; they just leave. And as you get in touch with them, tell them you miss them. They're like, if they respond, they're like, no, I'm never coming back. Then there are those that just kind of hop around from one congregation to another, which we've addressed being members of congregations before. But I think really the idea would be those who join one work and then leave and join another work and leave and join another work, is kind of what we'll probably concentrate more on today. And we think about areas such as I think about northern Alabama, middle Tennessee, certain areas where you go to one town and there's all kinds of churches. And sometimes there's some division, some animosity between groups, and other times there isn't. But you think about, isn't that great? You've got all these congregations, especially when everyone's getting along. But then you create an environment sometimes that people try to take advantage, and they go from one group to another, and they're hopping around. And it can cause problems more so than I think people realize. But what I want to do first and foremost is talk about leaving a congregation. If you've decided for one reason or another that you're no longer going to attend where you're a member at right now, first of all, what is the reasons? Why have you come to that conclusion? And secondly, have you talked to the leadership of the congregation, the elders, if you have them, the preacher, or any prominent men who are members of that congregation, to talk about the reasons or the conclusion that you've come to? And usually, what we find and what we've experienced, and why it's a difficult topic to talk about, is people just leave. And congregations are left scratching their heads. And even if something needs changing, if it's never brought up, it's never talked about, then no change ever takes place, or nothing is even ever looked at. And so let's talk about, and Richard, I'll start with you this morning about why it is, we would talk about this subject and why people leave congregations.
Well, people leave for various reasons, but they have to ask themselves, is it a scriptural reason for why they're leaving? I mean, first and foremost, we're servants of God, and we have to ask ourselves, does God want me to leave or does God want me to stay? And that's something I think that is not weighed very much. Many times people leave because they're offended in some way or some fashion, and they'll go to another church and then they'll leave there once they get offended again. And, I do want to bring, and this kind of came up before the show, and I do want to bring this up about being offended. The Bible speaks about ironing, sharpening iron in Proverbs, and I know that has to do with how a friend can encourage another friend. But a lot of times that's used, to talk about our Bible studies, and I agree with that. We can have a really lively Bible study, and somebody who is a good student can really help another good student, and vice versa. And that's many times people talk about ironing, sharpening iron that way. But one thing, and it popped in my head. The one thing about ironing, sharpening iron is friction is involved. And whenever you're dealing with convictions, things that people hold sacred to them, and that's their faith, there is a strong possibility that if you're challenging it, and it may not be you challenging it, you may just be pointing out the script, as you should be. You should be pointing out the scriptures that challenge someone's faith. And a good preacher does that. But if a preacher, for instance, is putting out the scriptures and it challenges your faith, you're going to be, as they say, you're going to have your toes stepped on. Why? Because ironing is sharpening iron, and you need to understand there's going to be friction. You're going to have to get tough, and you're going to have to look past the feelings and examine what's actually being said instead of being offended. And that's not the easiest thing to do. Lovers of the truth will accomplish that, but everybody at some point experiences this. And to just run away from a church because the preacher said something that offended you because you thought he was pointing you out, that is not something that Jesus wants us to do. Even if the preacher did it with a bad attitude and he did not do it scripturally, I don't believe that's the way to respond. I think then we have to, look at passages like Matthew 18 about how to go to a brother who has wronged you. But we have to understand that if there's ever going to be learning taking place, there's going to be, in some cases, a lot of friction, but there's always going to be friction. That just comes with learning. And so since we all want to learn, we have to understand that we're going to get our feelings upset from time to time, and running away from that is not the answer.
Yeah. Josh, go ahead.
I think that one of the things we need to recognize with with discussions like this is there's no perfect congregation. The pattern is perfect. It's not God's fault. The pattern is perfect. God had created a perfect pattern for the church, and then he filled it with imperfect people, and they're just going to mess it up. And so if there's any flaws or any problems within congregations, that's our fault, not God's fault. But every congregation is going to have its flaws. Every congregation is going to be imperfect. And so we can see the imperfections in a congregation that we're working with, and we can decide to go to another one, a better one. But they're not going to be perfect either. And so I think there's a sense in which we need to have that realistic expectation that no congregation is ever going to be perfect. There are a couple different kinds of imperfections, though. There is a tolerable imperfection, and some of these, might just be due to preference. Like, I don't like that preacher. Like the people at Richard's congregation. I'm just kidding. The preacher. The preacher may not be, everything that you want him to be. He may not preach exactly the style that you may prefer. The songs may not be ones that you like. The song leaders may not be very capable. Members may disappoint you. Guess what? It's going to happen. Judgments may be made by the elders or by the men of the congregation that are contrary to what you wanted. And all of those things could be considered imperfections, but those are things that we really just need to get over. That we really just need to, quit making a big fuss about and recognizing that it's not worth uprooting just for, I'll say, petty reasons such as that. So there are tolerable imperfections, but this is something I think we're seeing from some of our more progressive brethren, if we can, well, anyway, there are intolerable imperfections. And what our progressive brethren are trying to say is that, as long as they're Christians, they're brethren, then we can extend the right hand of fellowship. And we're seeing that with the institutional brethren and such. They're trying to blur the lines and cross over those lines without repentance, by the way. And they're failing to recognize that there are reasons that division is necessary. There are intolerable imperfections, and some of those would be doctrinal error. If a congregation is teaching error and you've tried and tried and tried to get them to teach the truth and to repent of their error, there may come a time when there comes a time where you need to walk away. And you need to separate yourself, shake the dust off your feet and move on. If they're, continuing to allow immorality in their midst, 1 Corinthians 5 is an example of that. And they're not doing anything about it. They're not dealing with it. They're puffed up rather than mourning over it. And you've encouraged them and tried to teach them the way that they ought to go, and they refuse to do so. Then, yeah, that would be an opportunity where you need to shake the dust off your feet and go. And so there are occasions where it is appropriate to leave a congregation. But sadly, I think too many of the divisions result from the tolerable imperfections than they do from the intolerable imperfections. I think sometimes we make too much of these tolerable imperfections and aren't willing to put the effort to really work through them or just deal with them. And so we take our toys, pack up our toys, and we leave. And that's certainly not a very godly spirit, I don't believe. I think there needs to be a sense of loyalty to our brethren, to the congregation that we've chosen to work with. And not just at the slightest bit of trouble, we up and leave. There needs to be a desire to work together and to stand together and to fix some of the things that we can fix in order to be better in our service to God. And so those are my beginning thoughts there.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things in what you said that I think are important. First of all, you talked about you've tried, you've discussed, you've done something to try and work through whether it's the tolerable or the intolerable imperfections. Easier for you to say, but the problem is there's a lot of people that they're not trying. Right? They just run from one group to another. And that's the problem. And sometimes, and I've dealt with this a lot where somebody leaves, like, what's the problem? I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, how can we work on something? How can we work together, or how can we fix a problem that you apparently see that we don't, if you're not willing to talk about it? Or they wait until they've gotten so frustrated, it's festered and built up, and then they blow up and leave. And then you're like, Wait a minute. If you felt this way all this time, why didn't you say something? We could have been working on this long before it got to this point, if what they're saying is even right, or if it's something that, yeah, maybe it's a tolerable thing, but maybe we could, make some adjustments. Maybe, it's not a reason to leave necessarily. But the problem is, we're not communicating, right? We're not talking, discussing these things, bringing them up. And then it gets to the point where we just go somewhere else, or leave. Uh, and the congregation is just left like, well, now that they're gone, why, it's sometimes they're thinking, well, I mean, no reason to work on it now. They're gone. So the other ones seem to have a problem with it. But sometimes congregations need to examine themselves too and think, wait a minute. All right. Let's keep this from happening in the future. Right. And let's work on that. So we can try to get some good out of it. But the problem is just the people to begin with, right? You oftentimes, when it comes down to someone just leaving, it's selfish. And especially if you haven't made the effort, right? That's what I'm talking about. Someone who hasn't done anything, they haven't made an effort to try and change something, to try and bring something to the congregation's attention, or a preacher's attention, the elder's attention. And so when they leave, it really is pride and selfishness and running from problems rather than dealing with them or addressing them.
I'd like to, before I comment, I do want to, we got to ask a question. I just want to say, Kane, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Kane Kuizamaki asked a question. And Kane, I put a link. We did a complete show on your question. You can go to that link. It's just above Thomas Thornhill's post. Go to that link and you can watch the show and it'll answer the whole thing. We did a complete show. We're not going to talk about it today because that's not what the topic's about. But if you want to answer to your question, just go watch the show. And if you have any questions about it, send us an email and we will address that. But now getting back to what Chris was talking about, I do want to talk about responsibilities, because a lot of people think that they're not taking on personal responsibilities when they join a church. And there is this concept out there that they don't even have to join a church, which, makes Christianity a spectator sport. And Christianity is definitely not a spectator sport, but too many Christians try to make it that way by only coming to church and sitting in the pews and like watching the show. And the problem is the work has planning that we have to do. Radio shows don't happen. We have to plan for that. The preaching don't even happen. You got to plan for that. Gospel meetings, Bible classes, all these things take planning. They take work. Everybody plays a role in that. And everybody has a responsibility with that when they join the work. You take on that work with yourself. It's not just the preacher and it's not just the elders. It's the entire congregation that is taking that work on. And when you leave a congregation, you are leaving your responsibility in that work. You may be thinking you're leaving those people. That's not just what you're leaving. You're leaving that aspect of the work of the Lord. And that is a very dangerous thing. If you go back to Ephesians chapter 4, Jesus puts individuals in a church for that work. When he said Ephesians 4:11, he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers. Verse 12, for the equipping of the saints, for the work of the ministry, and for the edifying of the body of Christ. And so, with that being said, we understand that when we join a work, the Lord wants us to do the work of the ministry. We have that responsibility. When you leave a congregation, as like what Chris was suggesting, when you leave a congregation like that, you're leaving a big hole that is going to affect the work of the ministry. And that reflects poorly on you. And it also is something that God is watching. So you have to understand then that if you're going to leave that type of hole in the work of the ministry, you better be thinking about, is this really what Jesus wants you to do? And I think that's a good point. I would like to bring up Thomas Thornhill. And I've never heard that name Thornhill before. But Thomas says a greater concern is when people leave and start their own congregation because they cannot get along with others. Rarely will a group like that prosper. Well,
Yeah.
They start their own congregation because they can't get along with others. You know, Christianity is definitely a people business, and get along with others. You know, I never seen a class on, people skills 101, I guess, but maybe we all need to take classes on how to get along with others, because if we can't even get along with our wives and our husbands by the way we see the divorce rates in this country, then we have to ask ourselves, how good are our people skills in getting along with each other? If we're going to do the work of the ministry, there has to be a level of commitment. And that means you're going to have a little bit of a duck's back. There's going to be offenses, and you're going to have to let things wash off of you like water on a duck's back. You can't be so offensive. You're not going to, if you get offended that easily, you're going to have a hard time, being married. Much less you're going to have a hard time having a job, and you're definitely going to have a difficult time raising kids.
Yeah.
So, people skills, and sadly, Thomas probably has a good point. People skills is something that, for whatever reason, we certainly are lacking in this country.
Too often we want to put responsibility on others that we're not willing to take on ourselves. And Romans 12, for example, right? In Romans 12, he says, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. That doesn't say anything about the other person, right? It's you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Another passage I want to go to is 1 Corinthians 12. God has set the members, each one of them in the body, just as he pleased. So how do you know? I mean, where you're going to church, that may be what God's desire is. So while you're sitting there all upset because Josh Thornhill preached a sermon against you think, and you're all upset about it, how do you know God doesn't want you there? How do you know that? I mean, there's a strong possibility that God wants you to deal with Josh. Maybe, like in Matthew 18, God wants you to go to Josh and follow his commandments. Maybe he wants you to go to Josh and say, Josh, why were you preaching at me? Why did you say this about me? Maybe that might be what God would want you to do. And who knows what the answer might be? You might be surprised.
Yeah, Josh might be like, it's about time you got it. And Richard, you left Ephesians 4, to go to 1 Corinthians 12, but really the same point in Ephesians 4, verse 16, being knit and joined together, by which every part does its share for the edification of the body, right? In love. It's kind of like a sweater, right? I remember growing up, I would wear sweaters, grandparents, mom, dad always get you sweaters. And let's say you get a little snag on a sweater. What's the last thing you want to do?
Pull on that snag. Pull
on that snag, because then the whole thing comes unraveled, right? And so and basically that's what's happening here. Here you are, right? You've been snagged a little bit, right? You've been rubbed the wrong way, and you got a little bit of a burr sticking there. And when you start to walk away, and it's almost to the point of what Thomas had pointed out, but you risk not only the possibility of leaving the Lord, depending on the reasons you're walking away, but you could cause an entire congregation to come unraveled. Rather than fixing a problem, just creating more of a problem. And not only that, especially when there are areas with lots of congregations around, you go from one group to another. That creates problems with brethren as a whole. Because then you run the risk of gossip. Why did you leave? What's going on? Or you just feel like you have to. All of a sudden you're talking to them about the problems, but you're not telling the congregation you left about the problems and allowing them to work on it. It just compounding one issue with another.
I'm wondering why churches a lot of times they don't even ask brethren when they come why they're leaving the other church. They just say, well, we're not going to judge on what took place before. We're only going to deal with what takes place now. There is a right way to leave a church and there is a wrong way to leave a church. And if somebody has left the wrong way, then the other church needs to be saying, look, you need to go back and make this right. Yeah. Because you're not leaving right. Yeah. But I rarely ever hear that.
Yeah, anymore I haven't, but I used to hear about that a lot. I mean, that's and thankfully I've been a part of congregations that had leadership that, elders that would do that very thing. It's like, well, before coming here, you really, from what you've stated, you need to go back and make things right, and try to work it out, and if it's not possible, there's various scenarios, situations, but you're right. A lot of times, congregations, they just get so enamored with the fact that, oh, here's somebody new. Let's let them come and join the work. And they're just excited about that. They don't even think or consider, the problems they may be, allowing in, or the sin, right, that's coming in, that leaven that can leaven the whole lump. Or the need that soul truly has. And that's unfortunate. Go ahead, Josh.
I think we've kind of addressed some of this before, but in this study already, but a lot of times people have gripes, people have complaints, and you see that throughout the nation of Israel, particularly the wilderness generation. I mean, they complained about everything. And that's the way some brethren are, unfortunately. I mean, they're just like the squeaky wheel. And unless you give it some grease, it's just going to keep on squeaking. Some people just live to complain, unfortunately. That just seems to be their reality. But the look at what the Bible says about those who complain. I mean, look at the wilderness generation, how God felt about the wilderness generation and their complaining. God was not pleased with them. And so we need to be careful and willing to examine ourselves to make sure that we're not following that same pattern as the wilderness generation, the complainers. But also, there is a difference between complaining and bringing up legitimate concerns. And I think one of the differences between the two is those who are complaining, they're just whining. All they're doing is just, oh, that poor pitiful me, or I don't like this. But if you've got a legitimate concern that needs to be brought up, the difference is those who have legitimate concerns, they have a willingness and a desire to work toward a resolution. Some people just want to complain and they don't want to do anything about it. They just want to everybody else to do it and fix it, and they just want to sit back and continue to eat their popcorn watching the game. But complain to if I can say complain properly, we need to have solutions in mind as we bring things up, and we need to have a willingness to do what we can in order to resolve the issue. Our elders have a policy that if you bring up a complaint, they're going to give it to you to work on fixing it. Like, okay, you have a problem here. Then go ahead and find a solution here. And I think number one, that is the right way. If you have a complaint, you need to work toward that. But then it prevents those who are just the complainers from just whining and griping all of the time. So that's another thing I think we need to remember. Don't ignore the areas where improvements are needed, but bring them up, go about that in the proper manner, in the manner that God would want you to go about improving those things, not just be a complainer sitting back and whining. That's the one thing about social media. I mean, just people complain about everything. I mean, it's annoying.
Josh.
Like every time. What's that?
Sounds like you're just complaining.
I know.
You're complaining about complainers.
I know it. That's right.
He's
He's just sitting there whining. This whole program has turned into a wine fest. Here's Josh. You want some cheese with that wine?
You know what? Friends like these, who needs enemies?
Right.
But anyway, my point is that people just get up in there and complain, and they're not. They that's all they're doing is just whining about the circumstance. Usually, it's sports and the way the country's run and things like that. But we Christians don't need to be those kinds of people. I think the scriptures make that clear. Do all things without grumbling and complaining, so that you may be blameless, harmless children of God, shining as lights in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. That's paraphrase of Philippians 2:14 and 15. But rise above the complaints on the tolerable imperfections.
Absolutely. I think that's vital. Go ahead, Richard.
Being part of the solution. I mean, it's one thing to identify the problem, but then it's inclusive to, I can go to Josh and say, Josh, this is what I see. What do you think about this as a solution? And right away, I'm saying this is our problem. It's not your problem. And, that's a whole different attitude. We used to have people at church that would talk to me and say, what are those people doing down there? And I would always correct them by saying, you mean, what are we doing down there? And they're like, we, and I'm like, yeah, you're a member there. You're doing it too. If I didn't correct them on that once, I corrected them 1,000 times with the we. And so when we're talking about at church, whether, you don't like a sermon, well, I don't care what the problem is. It's a we problem. It's not a they problem. And so you need to go into it thinking, okay, I see a problem here. How could we solve this? And so when it's perfectly fine to, point out a problem, but always be part of the solution by saying, can we do this instead? Would this fix this problem? And that way you're not looking like a whiner, you're looking like a fellow worker. And that's perfectly fine, instead of someone who just wants to throw grenades, into a church before they leave. And that happens quite a bit. So,
there's a couple of prophets. Nehemiah chapter 1, here he was nowhere near Jerusalem, and yet he gets word that the walls are, not being built. And when he goes to God in prayer, he uses that word exactly you talked about, Richard. We, right? He included him. He didn't say, why aren't they doing that? This was his people. This was, a part of who he was. And he recognized he's as much of the problem as they are because he's not even there. And so he can't say they should be doing this. Why aren't they doing that? But he said, forgive us. We have sinned. We need to be doing this. And he went and did something about it. Daniel and his prayer and other, just over and over again, we see how these men did that very thing. They included themselves in it. And I think that's vital for us to understand. We are a part of the work, right? This is and I've talked about this here a lot, making this work your own, right? Being a part of, truly being knit and joined together. I think that's vitally important for us if we're going to be successful, not only in making a congregation somewhere that people want to be, but also, cutting off issues before they arise and dealing with problems before someone just ups and leaves. Although that, sometimes they'll never say anything, it'll still happen. But rather than say, all right, they've left, so let's just continue doing what we've done, it takes some time. Congregations, I think, can take some time to examine themselves and say, listen, it's unfortunate that he did what he did, the way he did it, but maybe there is something we need to fix or work on so that this doesn't happen again. And who knows, maybe they would come back. You never know. But with that said, Richard, you got any last thoughts?
Yeah. I've left congregations. And one congregation, the first one I left, I was 29 years old, and I left because the stress was killing me. And I didn't have somebody, to put their arm around me and just say, hey, this is the work. This is hard. You got to keep at it. Don't give up. And I wish I'd had somebody who'd been down that road who told me that. I didn't get that. It's going to be hard if you're doing the Lord's work, and especially if you're in a place like Corinth. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be stress. There's going to be anxiety. There's going to be times when you're dreading going to church. You got to face the music. You got to go work to the best that you can and pray that God's going to, and he will bless that effort you're giving, but you got to see it through. Is there a time to leave? Yeah, there is a time to leave, but many times we leave too soon. And instead of being there, remaining there to defend the truth, somebody who's there being a thorn in people's side by defending the truth can, you can provide a lot of influence. You can do a lot that way. Mm-hmm. And, why let a troublemaker gain control of the church? Why let a Diotrephes get control of the church when you can be a thorn in his side? And who knows what the future may hold. Remember, God's king. God is in control. God can do what he wants to do. Give him a chance to do what God can do, which is anything, but give him a chance to do that before you leave. And like I said, that means, that you may have to take some anxiety pills before you attend church, but that's all part of it. Christianity is not easy.
Josh, last thoughts?
Yeah. One thing I would urge is to be patient with people. We want people to be patient with us, and we need to be willing to be patient with other people as well. Whether it's, especially so, if it's those tolerable imperfections, we need to bear patiently. And if it's things that can be improved, you need to work patiently to affect that change and to help bring about the better good that you're looking for. If it's intolerable imperfections, you still need to exercise patience and try and teach and try and instruct and try and be an example. Don't just leave at the first sign of trouble. stick around and try to make a difference, because sometimes you can. I know of entire congregations that have repented of error. Chris and I both do. Know of entire congregation that is repented of error, and it's because somebody went in there and they just stayed and they continued to teach and they continued to, stand on truth, and it made a difference. And so,
Well,
patience.
Nineveh was an entire city that repented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But being patient with others, I think, is key as well. Be
Absolutely.
willing to be forbearing, bearing with one another in love, Ephesians 4 verse 2 says. And so we would do well if we practiced more of that. That's not to excuse error, but be patient as you deal and try and teach before it comes to that point where you need to shake the dust off your feet and move on.
Yeah. I would recommend anybody go to 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 8, apply what it says love does and does not do, and say, all right, just almost like a checklist. Am I doing this or not doing this? How am I applying this in this situation? And if you're not being loving, by not doing that, then, make some corrections in yourself, and then do that. And then, work on it. And it may get to the point where you have to leave. I understand that, but, go through a process and try to help others, and work with people, rather than just leaving them stranded and wondering what in the world happened. So we appreciate everybody who tunes in and listens. If you want to shoot us an email, you can do so at BereanSpirits@gmail.com. And we'll take any questions, any recommendations, suggestions, and we'll consider that for topics of programs. Go back through and listen to some of the past programs. If you got questions, maybe we've already talked about it, as was mentioned earlier. But until next time, stay safe. Be careful out there in the bad weather this weekend. And Lord willing, we'll be with you next week studying the scriptures with Berean Spirits.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean Spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at BereanSpirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.